Hello everyone, welcome back to Luis Discusses Everything. In today's video, we are going into the 2022 Senate elections according exclusively to the polls, how they are polling. As we know, polls are an indicator, but not an overall predictor of what will happen in the state. It's more or less like a sample of what the public thinks in each state. And specifically, in this instance, we're going to look at the 2022 Senate midterm elections. Now, I went ahead, looked at the map, and I want to shade the map in either blue or red according to certain categorizations, right? Tilt will be defined as less than 1%, lean will be defined as 1 to 5%, likely will be defined as 5 to 15%, and safe will be defined 15% or more. That means how much does a candidate win or is likely to win or is leading on either the Republican or Democratic side. Okay, with that out of the way, let's get started with the video itself. So I'm going ahead and share with you guys a website called yapms.com, which gives you an interactive map that allows you to change each category from every Senate or state, depending on where do you think it will go. So I'm going to go ahead and categorize all the states that I feel are safe. Okay. So the ones that are left off are Pennsylvania, Nevada, Arizona, and Ohio and Georgia. The reason I categorize those is because those are going to be like the key states to look at, right? And all the ones that I shaded are either states that have very low polling, or the polling is just heavily in favor of one side or the other. Now I'm going to categorize the ones that are left according to specifically the polls, not what I think is going to happen, but rather what the polls say. So according to 538, and that's the source that I'm going to use for all the polling averages because they have more of an aggregate of all the polls together. It says that in Pennsylvania is the one I'm going to start in. John Fetterman is leading on average by 10.4% against Mehmet Oz. Again, I don't think John Fetterman is going to win by that margin. I think he's actually going to win by probably 1% or 2%. But that's what the poll says. And according to the polls, he is almost in a safe category right there. Now, let's move on to Georgia. And according to 538, the state of Georgia has Raphael Warnock up by 1.8% on the average. And I actually agree with that categorization. I think Raphael Warnock is a pretty strong candidate, and just Herschel Walker is just falling flat on his face. That doesn't mean that Herschel Walker is not going to win, but according to the average of polls, Georgia is very much has a lean categorization for the Democratic Party at this time, just purely based on the polls, not in my opinion. And then if we look at, let's go to the state of Nevada, and according to the 538 forecast model, it has Nevada with Cortez Masto, the Democrat, up by 3.7% as of August 22nd. That means as of today. So I'm going to go ahead and categorize that as a lean Democratic categorization. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the state of Arizona. I'm going to leave Ohio for the last bit because I want to talk a little bit more about that state in particular. But in Arizona, you have Mark Kelly, the former astronaut, who is up by 8.3% as of August 18th. So there hasn't been an update in the past 4 days, but there it is as of August 18th. So that gives him a pretty strong, almost safe categorizations, just like in Pennsylvania. So Arizona and Pennsylvania are pretty much lockstep in terms of their polling averages. Only of polling, I'm not counting pundits, and we'll discuss that a little bit further with our last state, which is Ohio. And the case of Ohio is the most interesting case because in the past election, Ohio voted for Donald Trump, which means that they very much they not only voted for Donald Trump, but they voted for Donald Trump by a margin of 8% in the state, which leads me to question this polling average result. You have Ryan, the Democratic challenger to J.D. Vance, is actually an open seat. He's up by 1% in the polls in a state that Trump won by 8% in the last election. So if we look at the Senate average, that will give the Democrat a tilt, almost around a tilt categorization there. And that would give the Democrats actually, according to the polls, a 52-seat advantage over the Republican Party. Now, the reason I question this a little bit, and also I think in the average, Johnson is still up, but in the most recent, and I'm talking about the Republican candidate in Wisconsin, in the average, Johnson is up, but the most recent 2 to 3 polls gave Barnes, the Democratic challenger, or the Democratic candidate for Wisconsin Senate, the lead, and he was leading by, I saw one poll that was all the way up to, we can look at it now, all the way up to 4%, which is interesting. But there's not enough polling to make an average. That's why we don't have a poll yet. Why do I call attention to this phenomenon in particular? It's because both in 2016 and 2020, you had a substantial miss in the polls. This means that even though these polls indicate that the Democrats are up 52 to 48 against Republicans in the Senate, that doesn't necessarily mean that the reality is such, right? Like I mentioned before, there were major polling misses both in 2016 and 2020. For example, in Wisconsin, there was a 7-point miss. In Pennsylvania, I think there was an average of a 9-point miss, even though Biden won that one as well as Wisconsin. I think the only few states where there weren't poll misses were in Georgia and in Nevada. And in Georgia, it was spot on, but in Nevada, it was actually flipped, where it showed that it underestimated Democratic support as opposed to Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, where it underestimated, and Michigan, where it underestimated Republican support. The same thing happened in Ohio. It underestimated Republican support. North Carolina polls underestimated Republican support. It seemed like there was an oversampling of Democratic voters and an undersampling of Republican or Republican-leaning voters that happened across the board. This phenomenon seems to be called the Trump effect, because in the past 2 elections, you had Trump on the ballot. Now, in this election is it's kind of like up in the air, because you do not have Trump on the ballot, but you still have him as an influential figure in the Republican Party. So essentially, we will have to see, right? As I said in my prediction video, we will see whether or not the polls are actually accurate or are a determining factor in indicating how the country feels.